Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Let me ask you something today. Do you remember who first taught you how to find your balance? Not just with your feet, but with your faith. Some lessons don't come with loud applause or trophies. Sometimes, it's just one steady hand. And the quiet courage to stand tall, for the very first time. In a world that always feels like it's trying to knock you down. This story begins with such a hand. And a little boy who learned that falling isn't the opposite of strength. It's part of learning to rise. If you believe that sometimes, just one person standing beside you can be the reason you don't fall, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, where every week, we share true stories that remind us. Healing begins when we're no longer alone. It was a quiet afternoon in Flagstaff, Arizona. The breeze carried the dry scent of pine and sun-warmed stone. Tucked off a winding road, there was a small family diner built with a rustic charm, red brick, a hand-painted wooden sign, and a natural stone patio that sloped gently into the desert light. It wasn't the kind of place billionaires usually visited, but Thomas Beckett wasn't just any billionaire. He sat by the window, posture tense, eyes fixed on the doorway like a man waiting for an earthquake. His 9-year-old son, Miles, stood beside him, thin, careful, his eyes wide like someone standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Miles didn't walk so much as he hovered, each step uncertain. His condition made balance a daily gamble. Ever since the accident that took his mother and left him with vestibular damage, he hadn't trusted his feet, or the world beneath them. "Take it slow, buddy," Thomas said, rising from his chair as Miles hesitated near the threshold between tile and stone. The ground dipped slightly where the stone patio began, not enough for most people to notice, but enough to throw Miles off completely. Miles tried to step down. His sneaker caught on the lip of the uneven rock. He teetered. Thomas lunged, too fast, too desperate. Whoa, I got you," he barked, reaching with both arms. But the sudden movement startled the boy more than the stumble. Miles flinched, recoiled, and fell, landing hard on his side with a gasp that clutched the air from his chest. Thomas froze, guilt flashing across his face. And that's when she appeared. Jenna had been clearing a table nearby, her apron still damp with coffee from a spilled pot. She didn't rush. She didn't gasp. She simply walked over with the calm of someone who had seen children fall, and knew that not all help meant lifting someone off the ground. She crouched beside the boy, but not too close. "Hey," she said gently, offering one hand, palm up. "Want to try standing on your own? I'll steady you, just a little. But only if you want." Miles blinked. He wasn't used to being asked. People usually grabbed at him or swooped in, always too quick or too loud. But this woman, she wasn't forcing him to get up. She was just there. He reached out, hesitantly. Jenna didn't pull, she just held steady. And with a shaky breath, Miles pushed himself up. His knees wobbled. His arms flailed for a second. But he didn't fall. He didn't sit back down, either. He stood. Thomas watched in silence, jaw tight. He had hired the best doctors in the country. He had flown in pediatric neurologists and specialized therapists. But never, not once, had his son reached for anyone's hand except his own or a professional's. Never had he stood up without immediately collapsing into a sob. But here he was, upright, leaning ever so slightly on a waitress with a soft voice and coffee-stained apron. Jenna gave Miles a small nod. "Nice work, champ," she whispered, and then stood, returning to her tray like it was no big deal. But to Thomas, it was everything. That night, long after the last dish had been washed and the chairs turned upside down on the tables, Jenna sat at the counter counting her tips. The diner had gone quiet, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator in the back. Outside, Arizona stars blinked in the kind of darkness that only small towns could offer. She was about to turn off the lights when Doris, the elderly hostess, walked over with an envelope in her hand. "Left for you," she said simply, placing it beside Jenna's coffee mug. It was a plain envelope. No name on the outside. Just folded once, carefully. Jenna opened it slowly. The handwriting was neat, purposeful, each letter written with intention, like someone unaccustomed to spilling emotion but trying their best anyway. You helped my son stand up today, without making him afraid. I've never seen that happen before. I'd like to ask you for something. Not a job. Not a service. But maybe, a favor. Help him believe that the world isn't just waiting to make him fall. There was no signature. Just a single business card tucked inside. Thomas Beckett, with a phone number and the logo of one of the largest real estate firms on the West Coast. Jenna exhaled slowly. It wasn't the first time someone had reached out to her because of what she'd done instinctively. Her past had a quiet way of following her, from the rehab centers to the hospitals, from those long hushed afternoons helping her brother stretch and try again, over and over, even when he'd rather stay curled up in bed. But this wasn't her brother. This was someone else's child. And someone else's grief. She wasn't sure what to make of it. She folded the note, slipped it into her apron, and tried to put it out of her mind. But the next morning, Jenna found herself glancing toward the door every time the little brass bell jingled. She didn't expect anything. Not really. But still, she looked. And then came a boy with hair that was always a little bit unruly, eyes too serious for his age, and sneakers just a little too big. Miles. He didn't come to the counter. Didn't say a word. Just walked past the tables until he reached her, his small hand curled tight around something. When she leaned down slightly, he placed it in her palm without a sound. A piece of gum. But not just any gum. A tiny pink piece shaped like a sneaker. Jenna blinked. It was one of those novelty gums sold at gas stations. Silly, cheap, easily overlooked. But in that moment, it felt like a treasure. Like a secret handshake between two people who understood what it meant to fall, and what it meant to rise. Miles didn't wait for a thank you. He just smiled, nervous and fleeting, and ran back to the booth where Thomas sat, watching. Jenna turned the gum over in her hand. A shoe. A step. A quiet message. I'm ready, if you'll still walk beside me. She looked up, met Thomas's eyes across the diner. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. Just waited. And that was enough. Later that day, she called the number on the card. When Thomas answered, he didn't sound like a billionaire. He sounded like a father who had spent too many nights fearing that one more stumble would break his son's spirit completely. I'm not a therapist, Jenna said gently. And I don't do this for a living. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Thomas replied, I know. That's why I trust you. And so Jenna agreed, not because of the card or the name, or the money she assumed might follow. She said yes because somewhere in this wide, uncertain world, a boy had handed her a tiny candy shoe with a kind of hope only a child could offer. And she wasn't about to be the person who let go first. The backyard behind the Beckett estate wasn't designed for therapy. It had once been a pristine landscape, polished stone pathways, trimmed hedges, a koi pond that glistened in the Arizona sun. But in the corner, just past the flower beds, Jenna found a small patch of soft ground shaded by an old cedar tree. That was where she laid down a flexible balance beam, a plank of cushioned wood, barely 6 inches off the grass. Miles stared at it like it was a tightrope strung between skyscrapers. You don't have to walk it today, Jenna said, crouching to his level. Today we just stand. She showed him how to place his feet, one in front of the other, just enough for the toes of the back foot to kiss the heel of the front. Then she did nothing. No hands, no holding, no hovering. Just stood beside him, her arms loose at her sides, her breathing calm and steady. 10 seconds, she said. That's all we're going for. Miles gave her a sideways glance, unsure. You're not alone, she added. But you're in charge. He nodded once, wobbled once, and began. The first few seconds were a mess of tiny shakes and clenched fists. But with every try, something shifted, not in his legs, but in his face. He stopped looking down. He stopped bracing for disaster. Instead, he listened to her voice, soft and slow, counting under her breath like a lullaby. Next came the breath work. Jenna knelt by the stone steps leading from the patio and said, "Before we move down, we breathe. In, then out." Miles practiced placing one foot on a lower step, then stepping back. He hated steps, the change in elevation, the momentary loss of visual control, but when he focused on breathing, the panic shrank. It didn't vanish, but it loosened just enough for courage to take a step forward. Then came the mornings in the garden. Jenna would set up little challenges, walking from one tree to another without glancing at his feet, or reaching a toy she'd placed just beyond the edge of a small incline. "Don't look down," she'd say gently. "Trust the ground. Trust your feet." It wasn't magic. Miles still stumbled. He still flailed sometimes when the wind surprised him or a pebble rolled underfoot. But he didn't collapse anymore. He didn't shut down. One afternoon, after nearly an hour of garden games, Jenna sat down on the grass, wiping her forehead. "You tired, champ?" she asked. Miles didn't answer right away. He looked down the small slope of the lawn, then back at her. "Can I try it alone?" he asked. Jenna smiled. "I'm right here." He took a deep breath and walked, his arms out slightly for balance, his eyes focused forward. He stepped down the slope, hit a patch of loose gravel, and kicked it up with his toe. The rock rolled and so did he, landing with a soft thud on the grass. Jenna instinctively started to get up. But then she heard something. Laughter. Not nervous giggles or embarrassed chuckles. Real, belly laughter. Miles rolled onto his back, grinning. "Did you see that?" he shouted. "I flew." Thomas had been standing at the edge of the patio, silently watching. At that moment, he stepped down and walked across the lawn toward them, the sun casting long shadows across the grass. He didn't speak right away. He just watched his son sit up, dust off his knees, and smile without apology. Then Miles said something that froze them both. "Jenna didn't catch me, but she was there. So I didn't fall all the way." Thomas looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't seeing a waitress or an outsider. He was seeing the person who'd helped his son feel safe in his own skin. And for the first time since the accident, he saw his boy laugh when he stumbled, instead of cry. The trail wasn't particularly steep, nor was it dangerous. It wound gently through the pine woods just outside Sedona, where the sunlight filtered through the branches like gold dust. The ground, though, was uneven, dirt packed firm with scattered roots, small rocks, and patches of dry grass that crackled underfoot. Thomas had planned the day trip as a reward. Miles had been making progress, real progress, and Jenna had gently suggested that a change of scenery might give him a chance to apply what he'd learned beyond the garden. Thomas agreed, though reluctantly. Every outing felt like a risk. Jenna had prepared carefully. She'd chosen a short trail, familiar and quiet, with no slopes too steep. Miles wore his most stable shoes, and his backpack was filled with water, snacks, and a soft towel in case he needed to rest. Jenna walked beside him for the first stretch, giving pointers quietly, pointing out safe footholds, reminding him to breathe and pause when needed. But then, halfway through a clearing, Miles asked, "Can I try going a little bit ahead?" Jenna looked at him. His eyes were steady, determined. She hesitated only for a second. Then she nodded. "Just a few steps. I'm right here." Miles moved forward, arms slightly out like wings, taking each step like it mattered. His balance was better now. More centered. More his. From a few yards back, Thomas watched with growing tension. His eyes weren't on the trail. They were on the little rocks, the roots, the way the dirt seemed loose in places. His fingers clenched. And then, Miles tripped. He didn't fall. Not completely. His foot caught on a root, and his body jolted forward, but he managed to steady himself with both hands, catching balance before gravity could win. But to Thomas, it was too much. He charged forward, voice rising with each step. No. No, no, no. Before Jenna could intervene, he scooped Miles up from behind, wrapping him in his arms like a soldier shielding a wound. You can't walk here. Thomas shouted, his voice sharp with fear. You'll fall. You're going to get hurt. Miles's body stiffened in his father's grip. His face, flushed from effort just moments ago, now paled with confusion and shame. Tears welled quickly. I was okay, he whispered. I didn't fall. But Thomas wasn't listening. He was still scanning the ground, his breath quick, his arms too tight. Jenna approached slowly, not speaking yet. Thomas turned on her with fire in his voice. What were you thinking? Letting him walk that? Alone. He wasn't alone, Jenna said quietly. I was right behind him. Thomas shook his head. You don't get it. One wrong step and... He already took the step, she replied, calm but firm. And he caught himself. Miles began to cry. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet stream of tears that soaked into his father's shirt. He wasn't crying because he'd been hurt. He was crying because for the first time in a long time, he had believed he could do it, and no one else had. Jenna stepped back. I think we should head back, Thomas said coldly. He didn't look at her. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, walked ahead to give them space, and said nothing else for the rest of the trail. That night, after they returned home, Thomas made a decision. His voice was tired, detached. There won't be any more sessions. He didn't offer a reason. He didn't need to. Jenna nodded once, quietly gathered her things, and walked away. Not because she gave up, but because she knew sometimes people need to face their fear alone before they can trust someone to walk beside them again. The house felt quieter without her. It wasn't that Jenna had filled the space with noise, she never did. But ever since she stopped coming, something intangible had gone missing. The air felt heavier. The silences longer. And Miles had folded into himself. He no longer asked to go outside. He stopped volunteering to help with the garden hose or walk to the mailbox with his dad. When Thomas offered to take him to the park or the museum or even for a drive, the boy simply shook his head. No thanks, he'd whisper, retreating back to his room with the careful gait of someone who no longer trusted the world beneath him. At first, Thomas told himself it was temporary. He tried distractions, new toys, extra screen time, a subscription to a STEM kit that arrived in colorful boxes every Thursday. But none of it reached Miles. The boy didn't seem angry. Just distant. Like someone looking out at the world through a thick window no one else could see. Then one Saturday morning, Thomas walked past his son's bedroom and noticed something strange. The door was slightly open, and Miles was kneeling on the floor, a roll of silver duct tape beside him. Thomas paused. The boy didn't see him. He was too focused. With quiet determination, Miles was wrapping strips of tape around his bare feet, anchoring them to the insides of his sneakers. It wasn't sloppy. He did it with precision, like someone who had practiced. Like someone who had done it before. Thomas stepped inside, confused. Buddy, what are you doing? Miles froze, mid-wrap. I just didn't want my shoes to slide today, he said, not looking up. You're going outside? Miles hesitated, then shook his head. No. I was just trying something. Thomas didn't know what to say. He crouched down, reaching gently for the tape. Why are you doing this? He asked, softer this time. Miles shrugged. Thomas noticed his son's eyes were glossy. Not red from crying, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from staying up late, but from holding too much inside for too long. Then Thomas saw the paper. It was folded on the desk, next to a small stack of worksheets. At first glance, it looked like a drawing, all thick pencil lines and uneven spacing. But when he picked it up, he saw it wasn't a picture. It was a message. Written in Miles's shaky handwriting. I need Miss Jenna because she doesn't hold me. She lets me learn how to stand. Thomas stared at the words. They weren't dramatic. They weren't poetic. But they were the truth. And they hit him harder than any outburst or tantrum ever could. In that single sentence, his son had explained what no therapist, no expert, no well-meaning friend had ever managed to get through to him. It wasn't about keeping Miles from falling. It was about helping him learn how to rise. Thomas sat there for a long time. He didn't say anything. Miles had gone quiet again, the tape forgotten, his small hands folded in his lap. Finally, Thomas placed the paper back on the desk and rested a hand on his son's shoulder. I'm sorry, he whispered. He didn't say more. Didn't make promises. But in that moment, something in his voice cracked, and Miles looked up. There in his father's face, he saw something new. Not control. Not fear. But the quiet beginnings of understanding. And that, for now, was enough. The sun had barely crested the hills when Thomas Beckett parked his car outside the community therapy center. The building was modest, stucco walls, a faded sign, and a small playground out back that had seen better days. But it was the laughter he heard first. Light, scattered, real. He followed the sound. Out beyond the swing set, nestled between chalk-drawn hopscotch grids and a worn-out sandbox, stood a makeshift balance course. Wooden beams just inches off the ground snaked in curved paths through the field. Bright cones marked starting points, and foam mats waited on either side in case someone slipped. And there she was. Jenna, in jeans and a sun-faded t-shirt, walking alongside a small boy who was wobbling with his arms stretched wide. She wasn't holding him. Wasn't even hovering. She was just there, close enough to matter, but far enough to let him try. Thomas stopped at the edge of the playground. He didn't announce himself. Didn't call out. Instead, slowly, deliberately, he stepped onto the first beam. His shoes wobbled slightly on the soft wood. He spread his arms out, like he'd seen his son do 100 times before, and took a breath. Jenna turned at the sound of creaking. Their eyes met. He didn't flinch. I used to think the first time I fell was when I broke my ankle skiing in college, Thomas said quietly. But that wasn't it. He took another step, his voice steady but low. The first time I really fell was the night I lost my wife. Jenna didn't speak. She waited. Thomas kept walking, arms still out, his gaze fixed ahead. I swore I'd never let anything hurt our son. Not the ground. Not his own legs. Not even his fears. He paused near the middle of the beam, arms still stretched wide. But I got it backwards. I've been so busy holding him up. I forgot what it means to stand next to him. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. I was wrong to pull him away. I was wrong to pull you away. A soft breeze passed through the playground, rustling the paper streamers tied to the fence. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter rang out again. Jenna walked toward him slowly, her steps careful, measured, not to interrupt, but to join. This isn't easy, she said gently. Thomas gave a soft, crooked smile. It's harder than any deal I've ever negotiated. They both laughed, briefly. The sound was quiet, but it cracked something open in the air between them. He stepped off the beam and stood beside her, both feet on the ground now. I don't want him to grow up thinking he needs someone to catch him every time, Thomas said. But I do want him to know someone's there, just in case. Jenna nodded. That's all he's ever wanted. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but full. Like two people finally standing in the same space after walking different roads to get there. I'm not asking you to come back, Thomas added. I'm asking if you'll walk beside us again. Even if we stumble. Jenna looked toward the field, where another child was stepping cautiously along a beam, his arms out like wings. Then she turned back to Thomas. "I don't just teach balance," she said. "I teach trust." He nodded. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas Becket didn't feel like he had to hold the world together. He just had to be present. Not as a protector, but as a father. The banner fluttered gently in the warm afternoon breeze. "Stand with me," bold blue letters hand-painted by a group of local volunteers, now strung proudly above a wooden platform in the middle of a sunny community park. Folding chairs were set in neat rows, parents and children seated shoulder to shoulder, some fidgeting nervously, others leaning forward in quiet anticipation. Thomas Becket stood off to the side, his hands clasped behind his back, dressed not in one of his tailored suits, but in a simple open-collared shirt and khakis. There was no security detail, no press team, no pretense. Today wasn't about the company or the Becket name. It was about something far more personal. Beside him stood Jenna, clipboard tucked under one arm, a gentle, steady presence as always. They had worked for months, late-night planning sessions, weekend workshops, recruiting therapists, physical trainers, and most importantly, parents. The idea had started as a simple one: help children with motor disorders learn balance. But over time, it grew into something more, a space where both children and parents could learn how to stand together. The Stand With Me initiative was now real, alive. And today was the first public event. Miles stood near the front of the stage, eyes wide, his small hands fidgeting at his sides. He wore a soft blue t-shirt and cargo shorts, his sneakers clean but already dusted from the day's activities. A small wooden bridge had been set up across the stage, a symbolic version of the balance beam he had once feared. Jenna gave him a subtle nod. Thomas knelt beside him. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he whispered. Miles looked up at him and smiled. "I want to." Then he turned, stepped up onto the bridge, and began to walk. Each footfall was careful, deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't waver. The audience held its breath, the hush spreading like ripples on a still lake. Halfway across, Miles paused. He turned slowly to face the crowd. "I don't need anyone to hold my hand anymore," he said, his voice small but clear, carried by the park's microphone system. "As long as I know, they're still there if I need them." Thomas swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wasn't the only one. A few quiet sobs echoed from the back row. Miles finished crossing the bridge and stepped down. Jenna was there waiting, not reaching, not rushing, just standing with one hand gently outstretched, palm open but not grasping. Miles glanced at her hand, smiled, and walked past it, confident, upright. But just before he disappeared behind the curtain, he glanced back. "She's still there," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Thomas felt the tear roll down his cheek before he could stop it. Not from sadness, but from pride. Pride in a boy who had learned to stand tall. And pride in the woman who had taught both father and son that the best support doesn't always come from holding on, but from knowing when to let go. If you believe that standing strong isn't just about staying upright, but about knowing you're not standing alone, then please, leave a like and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Join us each week for stories that remind us. The heart finds balance not in perfection, but in presence. We'll see you in the next moving story.